guys, welcome back for day 2 of painting. Today we're going to be making brush movement and marks with the different brushes that you guys have been given and picked up from your portfolio at school. In essence, watercolor is simply making marks with a brush. When we begin, we're going to look at how each brush does its brushing. I do not believe that there is one way to hold a brush. If you always held your brush like you hold a pencil, then you're going to be getting limited marks. So today we're going to be experimenting making marks with all of our different brushes, holding our arm, our wrist in different directions, applying different pressures, so we can see the vocabulary that we have with the different brushes that you've been provided. This exercise is just meant to introduce you to watercolor and introduce you to your watercolor brushes and get you familiar with the medium. You're going to be doing these exercises today on your Technique watercolor paper, and we're only going to be, working on maybe the top half or top 2/3 of this paper today. So find the paper, get your brushes, get a cup of water, and then get some paper towels as well so you can clean off the brushes as we go. So let's begin.
You'll notice in the Technique paper you should have 2 of them, so make sure you separate them before you guys get started. When paper gets wet, it tends to expand and then it shrinks when it's dry. Paper does not always retain its flat and smooth shape when it gets wet. Sometimes it warps. To prevent warping, we have to stretch the paper. We're going to be stretching our paper by adhering it onto the crescent board that was provided for you. You have to do this step every time before you begin a painting. This stretching of the paper with the masking tape allows the paper to lay flat and dry once paint is applied onto it. Normally, watercolor artists use a piece of wood to stretch their paper onto, but like I said, we're going to be using that 12.5 inch by 12.5 inch crescent square board. You need to make sure that masking tape goes around the whole entire edge of your watercolor paper, and then make it nice and flat seam by taking your fingernail across it. After you've stretched the paper, go ahead and label the different brush strokes that we're going to be doing today on the top portion of your Technique paper.
Grab any paintbrush you want. I ended up grabbing this one first, and then load the brush with a little bit of water. Dip it into any color you want. I'm going to use sea green. Mix the water into the paint palette to kind of loosen up the pigment. And then you don't want to dilute the paint too much with too much water. And then just make its imprint or stamp on the paper and see what it looks like. Use the different heights, angles, pressures, just to see all of the different techniques that you can get with that specific brush, with that specific technique. And so as you do these stampings, vary the angle of your brush handle on the paper to see what else you can grab. I want you guys to choose 2 different brushes to use for this section. So I use this brush for the first one, and I'll grab another one for the second one. But after you're done using a brush, you need to rinse it off in the water. Never leave your brush sitting in the cup of water like this. You always need to take it out after you've cleaned off the pigment, drag the bristles across the paper towel, and lay your brush flat. If you would leave your brushes in the cups of water, then the bristles will bend and they'll lose their nice uniform shape. So for that second brush, feel free to grab it from whatever bag you want. I'll use this small rectangular brush. Dip your brush in the water. You can try a different color to see what the different colors look like, and just do the same thing. Stamp it, changing the angle of your brush so you can see how the different brushes make different types of marks. And once again, once you're done, clean off the brush, drag it dry across the paper towels, and lay it flat to dry. The next technique, we're going to be adding a stroke. Once again, grab a different brush than the ones you've already used. Grab maybe a different color from your watercolor palette, and this time begin with a stamp, but this time leave your brush on the paper. Roll it in another direction. You can stamp the paper again And instead of rolling it, you could stroke it in another direction to add another mark to the stamp. Vary the direction and manner of mark making with the stroke, as well as the pressure you apply to the brush to create different marks. So it's a stamp and a stroke, stamp and a stroke, stamp and a stroke, just to see all the different possibilities. Once again, clean off the brush, drag it dry on the paper towel. Make sure you really clean it and lay it flat to dry. Do this technique with the second brush. I might try it with this nice big one here with a different color, just to see the different results that we're going to get. For this next one, we're going to be making a compound stroke. Use a different brush than what you've used previously, and you're going to stroke the paper in one direction. So it's not a stamp, but a stroke. Quickly change your movement, then again. This exercise may seem similar to the previous one, but here you are concentrating on stroking with more active, flowing movements of the brush. Do not make more than 3 strokes in a series, and try to form as many different configurations as possible. When you're done, clean off the brush, stroke it dry on the paper towel, and lay it flat to dry. Use 2 different brushes with this technique. Next, we're going to be painting tip and heel. First, practice painting lines with the tip of your rounded brush. Wet the brush, dip it in any color you like. Use an ink-like consistency of paint. So what I like to do is get the water mixing with the paint and pull it down so I can see the consistency of that watercolor on my palette. You could even start mixing colors together if you wanted to. Just make sure that you keep your brush clean whenever you add it to another color. So notice that once I'm mixing it with this green, I'm always cleaning off my brush before I go back to a previous color, and that helps keep my palettes nice and clean. So this is a nice ink consistency. So I'm taking that ink consistency because it will facilitate a nice flow. Vary the thickness of the line by changing the pressure you exert as you move the line around the page. So notice I'm going to press really lightly, and I can get a really nice thin line. Now, next, press the brush hard against the paper and drag it. Now you are utilizing the heel of the brush, which is next to the ferrule. The ferrule is this metal band joining the handle and the hair. As the pigment is used up, the brush will splay, leaving a trail of small scratchy lines. Now I had a lot of ink on my brush, or paint on my brush, so I might not get those scratchy lines. Let's see if I can do it again. There we go. You can start seeing the scratchiness of that showing through in some certain areas. With the heel, you can vary your pressure where you're pressing lightly to hard to thin again. So play around with that. And I'd like you guys to try this once again with 2 different types of brushes. But with this one, I want you to use the rounded brush. And then I also want you to use this angled brush that we're seeing here. So press lightly and then press hard. Even experiment using the side of your brush. What types of line can you make with the side of your brush? How big can they get? How much more thinner can your lines be when you use just the tip of your bristles? And then once you're done, clean off the pigment off your brush and drag and dry those bristles and lay your brush flat to dry. Next, we're going to do wet and dry. This exercise simply involves the amount of water you use to activate your pigment. More water obviously makes the paint flow more. So, and then less water makes a drier mixture. And the drier the mixture is, the more erratic the mark due to the splaying of the brush. So I'm going to use this brush first, and I'm not going to wet it. I'm just going to dip it in the little paint that we mixed here in the palette. And then I'm just going to drag it across the surface. You'll see how kind of scratchy that looks. It creates some really interesting line works. Now let's try it again. With this time, I'll dip the brush. I need to pick up a little bit more pigment. And then when I move that brush around, you'll see that I get a different flow in my marks than I did in the previous one. We'll just use one brush for the wet and dry technique. And when you're done, clean it off, drag your brush across the paper towel to dry it, and lay your paintbrush flat to dry. For the numbers and letters, you're going to spontaneously paint numbers and letters as they come to your mind. Vary the marks used to construct them. So repeat some of them, varying their construction. I'm gonna use a new brush I haven't used yet, which is this really, really tiny skinny brush. So I'm going to dip it into this blue, and I'm just going to play around trying to make different numbers, different letters, applying different pressures. And I want you to use 2 different brushes when you do this. You can go back and use another brush that you possibly haven't used, or if there's a brush like this big one I haven't used yet, I'm gonna go in with that and try, making some letters with this one as well, just to see the different variations of what I can achieve with these different types of paintbrushes. And when you're done, clean off the brush, wipe it dry, and lay it down flat. For our 7th and final technique, we're going to be painting shapes and fields. Again, we're going to be using numbers and letters. You can use any brush that you want. I recommend using one of these like really light, soft bristle brushes, either the small rectangular one or this rounded one for this exercise. And for this one, you're going to be painting a field of color, and you're going to be leaving a negative image of a letter. Oh, that turned out really nice. Or let's see if we can do like a number 1 in here. Now, after you've practiced doing like a couple like letters and numbers, then you can start trying to do more complicated shapes that you just create in your mind. Like, what complicated shapes can you create with the brush that you have? This technique is going to help us in days and weeks to come. It will provide very, very useful for you whenever you want to leave white in a watercolor. So if you ever have white in your watercolor painting, it's best to leave it white from the very beginning. So this technique will help you practice what it's going to be like leaving white on your canvas. And when you're done, clean off your brush, dry it off, and then now let's learn how to fully clean our brushes so they're ready for the next session. Before we clean off our brushes, we want to clean off our palette lid. So take that wet paper towel that you have, and you need to clean off the pigment that you might have mixed on the lid of your palette. We want to keep this nice and clean, so next time that we use it, we don't have any leftover color. It will stain the lid a little bit, that's okay. We just want to make sure that all of the pigment is picked up. After every painting session, you always want to wash your brushes. This helps them keep their shape and to help the bristles from deteriorating. Think about how you would feel if you were another student taking this class and the person before you didn't take care of their brushes. It would probably be very frustrating to use brushes that weren't well cared for. So after every painting session, always think about one, you need to have good brushes so you can make your paintings look amazing. And always think about 2, the people that will be using these brushes after you're done with them. So we just want to take good care of them. Watercolor is a very easy medium, so you don't have to use harsh chemicals for this. I have given each of you half of a paint soap bar that we will be using to wash our brushes. If you would use all of this by the end of the quarter, a great medium to wash your brushes is with Dawn dish soap. Actually, this is one of my favorites. Your soap might look a little gross after a while, and it might get a little like disfigured, which I recommend getting like a little cup, plastic cup that you can just kind of sit it in, but don't let it sit in water because then it'll get all gunky and gross. So to clean off your brushes, turn on your sink, wet the brush, and then gently rub it into the soap in a circular motion until it gets kind of sudsy. Once that gets sudsy, then you can rinse off the brush in the water. You know your brush is clean when the water is clear after it comes off of the brush. When you're done, and you have to do this to all of the brushes. So we used all the brushes today. So you have to be diligent and rub every brush into that bar of soap, rinse it off to where it's completely dry, and then, rinse it, that's what I said, sorry. And then once you're done, you need to find a container that you can store these brushes in vertically. Always recommend getting like an extra can just to put your brushes in. So maybe go to the grocery store, get a can of Campbell's chicken noodle soup, have a good lunch, and then use that can to store your brushes in. Your brushes need to be vertical. You don't want to put them back in those bags once they're drying because we don't want our bristles to get smashed up. Definitely keep those plastic bags handy so the next student can use them and don't lose them. But definitely, oh, look at that. My one brush was upside down. Make sure they're all facing the same way, all vertical. And then also reform the bristles. So like this one is a little sprayed out. So just use your hand to reform them so they're all going in the same direction. By doing that and being diligent to do this after every painting session will help your bristles and your brushes stay nice and perfect and help you make more beautiful paintings. So clean up and don't forget to submit those that assignment that we did today.